I guess debt stress and stress are interconnected, really. They're both basically mental and a physiological reaction to an outside stimulus, really. So in the case of debt stress, that would be a lack of money, or perhaps a bank or another company trying to reclaim money which they thought an individual owed them. So that's an external pressure which then generates a mental and physiological reaction in the individual. Particularly in Western society, money is a sign of status, and so a lack of money by association suggests that you're low down in society, perhaps, or that you've failed in some way. Quite often, people see themselves as the provider within their family, and when they're not able to provide that kind of security in terms of finance, they can quite often look to themselves and see fault within themselves, perhaps. In many ways. As I've just indicated, in one way is it encourages individuals to look towards themselves and perhaps find fault with themselves where perhaps they didn't see fault before. And quite often it challenges an individual's concept of themselves, and perhaps makes them feel challenged with their own family environment. If somebody's the breadwinner within their family and they're no longer able to provide that form of security, it can redefine their role within the family, and so that can have massive effects upon their worldview. People can become quite insular. Quite often one of the biggest problems is that people won't openly admit that they have a problem, so people keep those problems to themselves. As they keep those problems to themselves, the problems build up in proportion. And it means that people become cut off from the people around them, from their friends, from their family, and that just tends to exacerbate the problem, really. One possible example is people becoming more secretive. People no longer talk to their family about plans. People become more isolated. People stay in more. This cuts them off from the fundamental social network in which they normally exist. I think it affects all levels and ages of society, to be honest. I think there's certainly, with the younger generations now, there's certainly an element whereby people tend to live for the here and now rather than saving money, and want to have those material goods here and now rather than saving for them. So I think it's certainly something which is becoming increasingly more of a problem. But that's not to say that it doesn't affect all levels and ages of society. And certainly there is a big debt culture now whereby a lot of credit card companies and banks will give increasing amounts of loans, which are quite often unsecured loans. And so if people have difficulty paying those loans back, that's when the debt stress can kick in. So yeah, first of all, I would recommend speaking to somebody, but then also there are, as I say, various exercises which you can do on a daily basis to alleviate some of those symptoms. I'm loath to sort of make gender generalisations, but if I had to, I would say by and large women are actually better at dealing with the symptoms of stress, simply because women tend to be more in touch with their emotions and are more willing to speak to other people about the way that they feel and the things that are going on in their lives. Quite often men, particularly in our society, are brought up to feel that they need to behave in a particular way, and quite often that needs to be whereby they're perceived to be strong and able to cope with any situation. And sometimes all of us need help from other people, whether that's practical help or just a shoulder to cry on. And so I think there is probably a lot of room for improvement in terms of the men. Debt stress can be anything from having a sleepless night, to avoiding opening bills, as I talked about earlier, to actually people feeling suicidal or actually committing suicide. If you look back to sort of the late 90s, the early part of this decade, with the dot-com bubble, there were actually several stories of people who were investing all of their worldly savings in dot-com companies which went bust overnight, and there were stories of people committing suicide and throwing themselves out of windows and extreme cases like that. So it could be, as I say, it can be anything from fairly minor symptoms such as sleeplessness and listlessness to actual suicide. There's actually a syndrome now, a phobia called financial phobia, whereby people will avoid the issue and won't even open bills sometimes, throw the bills away, won't look at bank statements, simply as a way of avoiding the issue, really. A guy called Professor Birchall has actually done research into this, and as with all phobias, there are physiological symptoms connected with the emotional aspect. And the research has shown that people who do suffer from debt stress and particularly debt, financial phobia will avoid opening bills, looking at bank statements, and when they've done tests, the actual thought of actually looking at bank statements causes these type of people to break out in the sweat, to have increased heartbeats, higher blood pressure. So there are real testable examples of how the phobia can affect people. I guess the first thing would be to actually admit that there's a problem and to talk to somebody about it, whether it's a professional person or whether it's simply a member of the family or a friend. Purely by speaking about a problem, experience has shown me that people can feel better straight away. And it gives people a sense of balance and proportion about the issue. Certainly the one thing which I wouldn't recommend is to avoid the problem. And then perhaps think about speaking to a professional organisation, perhaps a debt management company, who may be able to consolidate some of those debts for them. Well, in the same way as it's good for people to talk to friends and family about their issues, I think sometimes it's good to speak to somebody who's actually objective and is removed from that social network. Sometimes some of the pressures which people feel regarding their debt are because of the duties which they feel they have towards their family and the expectation which their family and friends have of them. So sometimes it's good to speak to somebody who's not going to be judgmental or react in a particular way to the issues that they have. And sometimes that can be quite liberating for individuals. Speak to people. By speaking to people, you're releasing some of that negative emotion associated with the debt stress. So that's always very important. But there are also basic exercises that you can do to perhaps relieve some of that stress. And those can be quite helpful on top of sort of the practical elements, such as speaking to a debt management company, speaking to your bank. The kind of things which I'm talking about are breathing exercises which you can do. You can also use forms of exercise, a brisk walk, a run, which can just relieve some of that temporary, alleviate some of that stress on a temporary level, whilst you're looking at the more long-term ways of dealing with that.